Come along with me for my first ever quilting project. The fabric store had a lot of Star Wars, as you can see, but I was looking for something for my friend who's expecting a baby any day now, and this friend is really into the Muppets and especially Miss Piggy. So, here's all the supplies I got going here. I even picked up one of those quilting squares. I don't have a rotary cutter, and they're so expensive. I thought that I could get away with razor blades, but that was the first mistake of many along the way in this project. Here's the quilt batting. Just got a bundle of it, so I have a lot of extra. So first thing I wanted to do was kind of experiment with some layouts. I knew I wanted to do a checkered pattern. Decided on these two as the checkers. This is going to be my edging, which I now know is called a binding. I'm ironing everything, and I'm cutting off the selvage edge that has that logo strip on it. Next, I'm folding my fabric over and making sure that all the grain line is lined up nicely before I cut it in 2 strips. And then I'm going to try cutting it into squares. Around here is where I was finding that the razor blades don't cut through many layers of fabric very well. I'm used to using razor blades for cutting foam. They are a really great tool for foam fabrication and puppet building. Just make sure that you're careful with them and that you have a sharps container nearby. This is Talisker coming to see what's happening. So I've got my squares cut out all nicely, and once again just laying things out to make sure that I like the look of things and that it'll be a good size for a baby quilt. I'm going to stack these all up in a second here. This is the back fabric. I've decided I want it a little bit bigger, so I'm going to make like a little border. And then the binding edge material is that stripy one. Making stacks here, alternating what I'm starting with, and this will be a 5 by 5 for pattern. I have a few extra at the end that I just put aside for future projects. Finally, to the sewing machine. Now I'm putting these pieces right side to right side, so the side that has the design on it, I'm facing them together and then sewing along the edge. Then when you open it like a book, you have the seam hidden on the back, and both the patterns are on the same side. My first row, I wasn't really understanding the flow of things, but my second row just worked so well. I just kind of figured out that each time you open it, you slide the whole thing to the left and you put the next square on top. And it is so satisfying as someone who probably has ADHD to do this step. I don't know, it's just completion of a task. Makes my brain so happy. So, you sew, I'm doing a back stitch, I'm trimming right away, and I open it, put the next square on top, go until the stack of 5 is done. I'm going to take those all to the ironing board, flip it over, and I'm pressing these seams towards the green fabric. If you have like a really dark fabric, press it towards that side. Mine were kind of the same, but I figured the green was a little more opaque. Now here's where I make another great mistake. I don't know if you caught it here. I'm going along, making sure that each of the seams are nested together and lined up. I'm being so careful, and then I open it up and realize that I didn't sew right sides to right sides. So I have to seam rip that. I'll do that off camera. But I've got other strips, so I'll sew those together. Right sides to right sides again. I'm starting with a back stitch. Every time I get to where the seams overlap, I'm doing something called nesting. So I'm trying to make sure that the seam on the top piece goes one direction and the seam on the bottom piece goes the other direction, and then they just lie flatter. It's starting to actually take shape and turn into something that looks like a quilt. Going back over to the ironing board now, and you'll see that some of my corners turned out really nicely, like the seams just line up in the perfect cross, and some of them aren't so great, but that's okay. It's a baby quilt, doesn't need to be perfect, and next time I do a quilt, this will get a little bit better every time. I'm taking those seams that I just sewed that go the whole length of the quilt, and I'm pressing them open. The seams from before, just leave them the way they were. I'm going to cut the border for this, and I'm making sure that I have a large enough piece left of that to cover the whole back. So I'm lining things up. I just need to remember to start with that green piece a couple inches over, and look at how I don't remember that. So I start to sew. Luckily I didn't get very far. Once again, we will go off screen and seam rip that, and we'll just move on to another corner for now. So starting with the corner piece a few inches over, the goal is so that at the end I can make some mitered corners. I'm sewing right up to the edge, and then I'm just starting another piece. I'm not trying to keep them continuous because that seems like more of an advanced thing. So I'm just checking to make sure that I left enough there, and it looks like we're good to go. So I leave one piece straight, and the other one I fold under at a 45-degree angle, and then I'll just sew along the edge to keep those together. And I'm trimming off the tail that hangs over the edge. Did that to all four, and then of course the binding is going to wrap around over. But I want to stitch down the angled piece now of the mitered corner. I took this opportunity to actually change the thread into the color matched thread, and I'm a bit lazy, so I just left the bobbin alone. The only thread that's going to show here is the top one. I'm stitching along that edge there so that you don't have a weird pocket or flap. And here's where my sewing machine kind of started acting funny. It was breaking a lot of threads. Usually when I backstitched. So eventually I just stopped doing any backstitching, but it really didn't like the thick layers that I needed to get through later, and I was rethreading this machine a lot. So over to my cutting mat, layering these things together. We've got the green piece underneath, the batting in the middle, and the whole quilted top piece on top. And I'm clipping the edges around and pinning a few places in the center because I need to trim the batting and the back piece, and I don't want to mess up and accidentally trim it too short. So lots and lots of pins, and I just keep checking until I'm sure. I cut that off with my shears all in one go. That's done for the day, and it's time to cut my binding pieces. Now, I did 2 inches wide. This was another horrible mistake. Next time I'm probably going to do 3 inches at minimum. I think it's one of those things where you can probably get away with 2 inches once you're more advanced. And there are some people on the internet that were doing fancy things, like sewing these diagonally, and folding them open, and matching perfectly, but I think that's beyond me. I really wanted to match up the stripes and the stripe pattern, so I'm just going to sew these straight across. So back to the ironing board. I'm going to iron these binding strips that are now all sewn together lengthwise in half. And that's going to bring us into day 2. I figured today would be such an easy accomplishment. I just had to sew the border around. How hard could that be? Little did I know it would take up many hours, and it probably would have been easier to just hand sew this binding on. So it's a lot of thickness here, and I decided to start by sewing the 3 layers together without the binding to just kind of bundle it all. I'm really not sure if it made a difference in the end, but that's what I started with. And as you can see, I've already broken one thread. Check in there to make sure it's not broken again. And here's a progress update. So after all that concern about not cutting the backing too short, I think that happened anyways. So here's what I did to fix it. I took a scrap, I placed it, not quite there, right there, and I sewed a line across it, I folded it, and then I sewed that down, and that way I didn't have any exposed seams that aren't going to be covered by the binding. And so begins my slow descent into madness as I attempt to bind this quilt. My poor little sewing machine just can't handle anything more than 2 layers of fabric. And I suggest you go and watch one of the many YouTubers who does quilts better than me as a beginner if you are looking to learn some of this stuff. My favorite is Mary Mabel Market. She has some great tutorials, and also her videos are so pleasant to watch. She's just got such a great voice, and it's really calming to the nervous system. At this point, I decided to trim off the excess because 2 inches is not a lot of fabric to work with. And then I'm curling the binding over the edge and sewing that down. And I really should have color matched my thread to the border, not the backing. But whatever. Now at the corners, I really wanted to fold under all the raw edges. So trimmed off whatever I could to reduce the bulk. And this was a part that definitely had to be hand sewed at the end. And I just clipped over it, tucked in what I could, and sewed along the edge of the binding there to keep things in place until later. And here my machine broke a thread, and then about 40 more, so that was a lot of rethreading of the machine. I definitely could have switched to hand sewing around now, and it probably would have come together more quickly, but I don't like hand sewing, so I'll only do it when necessary. One more press on the ironing board. And here's the big reveal. I'm really proud of this. As you can see, it's not perfect, but it's for a baby, so it's going to be pooped on and puked on, and that makes a baby quilt a really great beginner's project. Here's the back side. And lastly, I need to make sure that Hobbs approves. I think we're good. Oh, big yawn. Thanks for watching.